Ever watch a room full of billionaires set up a humiliation and end up watching their kingpin collapse in real time? Stay with me, because this cleaning lady didn't walk into that Beverly Hills ballroom to beg for respect. She walked in to collect a debt that had been compounding for 20 years. The main hall of the Blackwood mansion in Beverly Hills crackled with expensive perfume, crystal clinks, and the kind of laughter that only happens when people believe they're untouchable. Under chandeliers the size of small cars, California high society gathered in tuxedos and gowns that could fund a family's rent for a year without anyone noticing. And when Victoria stepped down the marble staircase, the laughter erupted sharp, malicious, coordinated like a chorus. It wasn't admiration. It was mockery dressed up as entertainment. Victoria Sterling, 35, black, composed, descended with her shoulders back and her head high, wearing a dress so elegant it made the room hesitate for a fraction of a second before the cruelty surged back. Richard Blackwood, the host, raised a flute of Dom Perignon as if he were presenting the evening's main act. "Look who decided to show up," he murmured to the guest closest to him, loud enough for the right people to hear. "Our dear cleaning lady." The words carried the same energy as someone introducing a joke they expect the entire room to laugh at on command. The thing was, Victoria had never imagined she'd stand in that ballroom as anything other than invisible. For 2 years, she'd cleaned every inch of that mansion-polished marble, scrubbed brass, wiped fingerprints off glass so perfect it looked like air. She'd done it quietly, efficiently, the way invisible labor is expected to function. Flawless output, no presence. She watched these people perform politeness like a routine, exchanging compliments they didn't mean, then turning around and treating the staff like movable objects. And Richard treated her like the lowest, only to remind him how high he sat. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier in a gold envelope so thick it felt like a threat. Richard had handed it to her with a smile that never warmed his eyes. "Charity gala on Saturday," he said, glancing her up and down like he was measuring the gap between her and the world he owned. "Dress code, maximum elegance. You surely have something suitable in your wardrobe, don't you?" His friends, people who treated cruelty like a sport, laughed right there in the hallway. Victoria understood the setup instantly. This wasn't generosity. It was a trap, a staged humiliation meant to put her back in her place in front of cameras and socialites. Richard had even invited reporters because he wanted witnesses. He wanted the story to travel. He wanted an educational moment, as he called it, like he was teaching the world a lesson about who belonged where. The day before the gala, while Victoria vacuumed the hallway outside the study, she heard him making it worse. "Let's make a bet," Richard said to his wife Helena, voice slick with confidence. "100 grand says she doesn't have the nerve to show up. And if she does, she's the entertainment." Helena's laugh was soft and poisonous. "You're awful, Richard. The poor thing will probably show up in something borrowed, realize she doesn't fit, and leave in 15 minutes. They said it like they were predicting a weather report, like her humiliation was a scheduled event. But Richard didn't know 2 things about Victoria, 2 facts that made his little plan not just cruel, but catastrophically stupid. First, Victoria had grown up around wealth long before she ever cleaned it. Not the fantasy version, but the real version, where secrets live behind velvet curtains and money moves like gravity. Second, some storms don't break you. They teach you how to walk through pressure with your chin up and your hands steady. So when Victoria arrived, she didn't arrive like someone grateful to be allowed in. She arrived like someone who knew the architecture, understood the rules, and refused to accept the role written for her. She walked through the hall beneath mocking stares, serene and unhurried, as if every step had been rehearsed in her mind for years. Guests whispered, trying to patch the gap between what they expected and what they were seeing. "My God, she really came." Patricia Weston, a senator's wife, whispered to her friend. "And look at that dress." Vivian Chambers, an oil heiress who hid insecurity behind cruelty, sniffed. "She rented it. 10 payments probably." Pathetic. What they didn't know was that Victoria hadn't rented, borrowed, or bought that dress. She'd reclaimed it. It was a piece of her own history, carefully preserved, waiting for the exact moment it would matter. Richard approached her with a pack of billionaire friends orbiting him like satellites. His chest was puffed with the confidence of a man who thought he controlled the room's outcome. "Victoria," he said, smiling like a host welcoming a novelty act. "What a pleasant surprise. I never doubted you'd come. After all, when a person like you gets an invitation to an event like this, Victoria's calm voice cut through the air, like silk pulled tight. A person like Miché repeated evenly. Go on, Richard. Finish the sentence. For a microscopic moment, something in her tone made Richard hesitate. It wasn't the submissive, quiet voice he was used to hearing in the hallways. It was firm, balanced like someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. But arrogance snapped back into place. Well, you know, he said with a chuckle, someone who doesn't normally frequent this kind of environment. You must be feeling intimidated by all this elegance. Victoria smiled, slow, controlled, and strangely dangerous. The kind of smile that makes people stop laughing because they suddenly can't tell who's in control anymore. Intimidated, she repeated softly, holding his gaze. No, Richard. I feel exactly where I've always belonged. The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was loud. In that brief pause, the room shifted, like a crowd realizing the script might be wrong. Richard cleared his throat, trying to regain dominance. Well, enjoy the evening, he said loudly. I'm sure it'll be educational for you. Victoria let her eyes sweep across the crowd faces, names, alliances, like she was cataloging a room for future reference. Oh, I'm sure it will be educational, she replied, for all of us. Richard, annoyed that she hadn't collapsed the way he expected, doubled down. He tapped a silver spoon against his crystal glass and called for attention. Everyone, he announced, voice bright with performative charm. I'd like to introduce our special guest tonight, Victoria, our dedicated cleaning lady. Cruel laughter rolled across the hall. Phones lifted. Flashes popped. People started composing sarcastic captions in real time. Helena leaned in, fake concern painted on her face. Richard, don't you think this is a little cruel? Richard laughed. Cruel? I'm giving her the opportunity of a lifetime. When else would someone like her ever see a room like this? Victoria stood in the center of the attention, and the room waited for her to shrink.
But she didn't.
She didn't fidget. She didn't apologize. Her expression carried the calm of someone who'd survived worse than whispers and champagne snobs. Patricia Weston approached with a circle of women wearing poisonous smiles. Victoria, dear, Patricia cooed. How long did it take to choose that dress? Must have been challenging to find something suitable. Victoria's reply came smooth and steady. Actually, this dress has a very special history. It belonged to my mother. Vivian Chambers laughed sharply. And where did your mother get a dress like that? A fancy thrift store? Victoria's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes did, like a door unlocking. My mother wore this dress the last time she stood in a ballroom like this, Victoria said. 20 years ago, back when she was still Isabella Temps Blackwood. It was like someone dropped a heavy object into a glass room. Conversation stopped mid-syllable. Several guests turned slowly, realizing the sound of her last word carried more weight than they understood. Richard's laughter died. He pivoted, face tightening. What did you just say? Victoria held his stare without blinking. Blackwood, she repeated. It's funny how some people conveniently forget their own family history. Richard's skin paled as if his body knew the truth before his mouth could form lies. Helena's hand clamped onto his arm. Richard, what is she talking about? Richard forced a laugh that sounded brittle. She's delirious. An employee trying to get attention. Victoria reached into her purse and produced an object that made multiple people gasp, because it was unmistakable if you were part of that circle. The Blackwood family engagement ring, antique gold, a crest engraved inside, a large blue sapphire passed down like a throne. This ring, Victoria said, holding it high so every phone camera could catch it, was given to my mother by Henry Blackwood, my grandfather. The man you told everyone died without an heir. Richard's voice cracked as he lunged at the only defense he had left. Where did you get that? You stole it. Victoria let out a short laugh with no humor. You can't steal what was stolen from you, Richard. You can only recover it, Patricia Weston whispered, shaken. Is she telling the truth? Vivian's voice came out smaller than she intended. Impossible. Richard would have told us if he had family. Victoria turned her head slightly as if addressing a room of students who'd failed a basic test. Cousin? She said, No, I'm not Richard's cousin. She paused, then looked directly at him. I'm his half-sister. The room erupted murmurs, shocked breaths, the sound of people suddenly recalculating their proximity to scandal. Richard snapped. This is ridiculous. When she got pregnant with me, your father promised to take care of us, and he did. Until he died. Helena stared like she was watching the floor vanish beneath her. Victoria pointed a finger at Richard, not screaming, not shaking, just presenting a conclusion. And you decided it would be easier if we didn't exist. You cut off support. You sold the house your father bought for my mother. You left us in poverty while you inherited everything? Richard tried to scramble for footing. I had no obligation. Interesting, Victoria interrupted, considering you inherited 100% of a fortune that should have been divided. The guest began drifting away from Richard as if guilt were contagious. He grasped at the last defense of the arrogant. Prove it. Victoria's smile returned, colder. Oh, Richard, do you really think I came without proof? She lifted her phone and nodded toward the entrance. They can come in now. 3 people entered, and the air changed again. Diane Morrison, Beverly Hills' most respected investigative journalist, David Chun, an inheritance attorney known for eating fraud cases alive, and Dr. Hamilton, the family's private physician, who made Richard stagger like he'd taken a body blow. Helena whispered, horrified, Dr. Hamilton, what are you doing here? Dr. Hamilton stepped forward, hands shaking, voice steady in the way a man sounds when he's finally done being afraid. 20 years ago, I was forced to sign a falsified death certificate, he said. Henry Blackwood did not die of natural causes. He was slowly poisoned with arsenic over several months. The ballroom filled with stunned noises, sharp inhale, muffled cries. Diane raised her hand. Phone's down, she said. This is an official confession being recorded. Richard's face slicked with sweat. You're insane. My father died of heart problems. Dr. Hamilton didn't flinch. Your father discovered you'd been embezzling from the company. He changed his will to include Victoria, and he was preparing to report you. Then he began showing symptoms: confusion, weakness, organ failure. It wasn't a heart condition. It was poisoning. David Chun opened his briefcase and pulled out lab results. A blood sample was independently tested last week. Arsenic levels consistent with fatal poisoning, Richard shouted, wild now. This is a conspiracy. Diane stepped closer. Mr. Blackwood, I have transcripts of 5 conversations you had with Dr. Hamilton where you threatened to destroy his career if he spoke. Victoria finally spoke again, voice quiet but surgical. Richard, you didn't just steal money. You stole 20 years of my life. Richard pointed at everyone like that could change facts. I didn't kill anyone. Victoria connected her phone to the mansion sound system with a smooth motion that looked practiced. A recording played, and Richard's voice filled the ballroom, unmistakable. Hamilton, you keep your mouth shut about anything strange in the old man's blood. If you talk, you'll never work again. And that woman and her bastard daughter, they can fend for themselves. Silence slammed down. Even the people who had laughed the loudest earlier now looked at Richard like he was radioactive. Helena's face crumpled. Richard, you did this? For 20 years? Victoria's composure cracked for one moment. One raw flash of pain. 20 years, she said, voice rising. 20 years of cleaning in this house while you smiled at me like I was nothing while I was the living proof of what you did. Then she steadied herself again. You want to know how I got this evidence, she asked, calm returning like a blade, sliding back into its sheath. I didn't end up working here by accident. I applied for this job on purpose. I spent 2 years listening, collecting, documenting. While you thought I was invisible, Richard tried a last desperate pivot. Even if any of this is true, the inheritance was settled years ago. David Chun smiled for the first time. Actually, when murder is involved, assets can be redistributed to the original will. And we have Henry Blackwood's actual will. Richard's knees buckled. He looked like a man watching his own empire evaporate. Diane began projecting documents onto the mansion's screen bank transfers, hidden accounts, payoff memos. $200,000 transferred to Dr. Hamilton 3 days after Henry's death, she narrated. Memo line, silence is golden. Then another recording Richard instructing his accountant. Make the numbers dance. If anyone finds out I took $20 million over 5 years, I'm ruined. Blame the market. Expansion costs anything. Guest whispered in horror. He stole from his own company. He bribed judges. He diverted charity funds. Each new revelation peeled away another layer of the social armor that had protected him. People who'd arrived as his friends were now trying to physically distance themselves, like they could step out of the blast radius. Richard looked up at Victoria, voice broken. Please, you got what you wanted. Stop. Victoria stepped closer and knelt so he couldn't hide behind height or status. You killed our father, she said softly. You stole my family, my inheritance, my dignity. You made me clean the hallways of the home built from what you stole. I can make it up to you, he whispered, desperate. Victoria's eyes didn't soften. There's no making up for 20 years. There are only consequences. Helena's phone rang. One of their children calling from college panicked. Mom, are they saying online Dad is a murderer? Helena stared at Richard with a disgust so complete it looked like grief. No, she said aloud to no one and everyone. You don't get to mention our children. You shame them forever outside. Sirens rose. Police arrived. Officers entered the mansion with that brisk, undeniable energy of reality finally catching up. Dr. Hamilton said quietly, he'll be arrested tonight. Murder, fraud, blackmail, tax evasion. Victoria turned toward the room, people who'd laughed at her now, watching her with fear and awe. Understand this, she said, voice carrying. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it for justice. For everyone men like Richard trample when they think no one is looking. Patricia Weston approached, trembling. Victoria, we're so sorry, we didn't know. Victoria's reply was firm. You knew I was treated like I didn't matter. You laughed, you joined in. The only difference now is you learned I have more power than you. The police led Richard away in handcuffs through the same hall, where he'd handed her that invitation like a weapon. He looked at her one last time, hollow. You destroyed my life. Victoria stood tall, dignity unshakable. No, you destroyed your life the moment you chose evil. I just made sure the truth couldn't be buried. On the balcony, reporters gathered cameras, microphones, lights. Helena asked, but what happens now? Victoria looked out at Beverly Hills glittering below. Now justice gets served, she said, and maybe the city learns class has nothing to do with a bank account. In jail over the next hours, Richard would learn the part he hadn't anticipated. Victoria's evidence wasn't limited to one death. It mapped a whole network embezzlement, blackmail, bribery, charity fraud built over decades. His fall wasn't going to be a scandal. It was going to be a full demolition. 6 months later, Victoria Temps Blackwood sat in Richard's former office, now stripped of arrogance and rebuilt with purpose. The walls that once displayed trophies of ego now held photos of employee promotions, certificates from social initiatives, scholarship programs, and letters from workers who'd never been treated like humans until she took over. Richard had been sentenced to 25 years without parole. His fortune was confiscated for restitution. Helena divorced immediately and moved away with the children. Before leaving, she found Victoria to apologize, eyes wet. You could have destroyed us, she said, but you protected my kids from the worst of it. I'll never forget that. Victoria's answer was simple. Children don't pay for their parents' sins. They deserve a chance to be better. Dr. Hamilton now worked as a medical consultant for the company, providing free care to employees. I never thought I'd have the courage to do the right thing, he admitted once. You reminded me dignity is a choice. Patricia Weston and Vivian Chambers tried to reconnect, but Victoria kept them at arm's length. You laughed when you thought I was beneath you, she told them calmly. Now you want closeness because you learned my last name and my balance sheet. That's not respect. That's opportunism. Victoria's story went viral worldwide. Universities invited her to speak about leadership and justice, and she did a few selectively, but she refused to become famous for pain. I don't want to be known for suffering, she said in a rare interview. I want to be known for what I built after. The company began funding scholarships for employees' kids, microloans for entrepreneurs in underserved communities, and one of California's largest domestic violence support funds. One afternoon, Victoria received a letter from Prison Richard's handwriting, shaky. He wrote that he didn't deserve forgiveness, that he was trying to understand how greed turned him into a monster, that his children asked about the aunt who protected the family when he failed. Victoria read it, then placed it in a drawer without replying. Forgiveness was personal, justice was already complete. During a Forbes interview, the journalist asked, "Some say what you did was revenge. Too cruel. What do you say?" Victoria didn't blink. Revenge would have been doing to him what he did to me, she said. Justice is making him answer for his crimes and building systems so others don't suffer the same way. There's a difference. When the journalist asked, "And what advice would you give someone facing injustice?" Victoria looked out through the glass at employees, eating lunch in a garden that used to be off limits to people like them. Her voice stayed calm, but it carried steel. Don't let injustice be the final chapter, she said. Build something so strong, so dignified, that what was meant to break you becomes only the opening scene of your triumph. That night she went home, not to a cramped apartment, but to a warm house where she'd adopted 2 children who needed a second chance the way she once did. As she helped them with homework, she thought about Henry Blackwood, the father she barely knew, the bloodline that had been denied, the truth that had been buried. If he could see her now, she believed he'd be proud. Not because she toppled Richard, but because she transformed a company built on fear into a place built on opportunity. Richard tried to humiliate a cleaning lady and discovered the most dangerous person in the room is often the one everyone trained themselves to ignore. If this story hits you, drop a comment with what you would have done in Victoria's place. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that dignity can't be bought or inherited, and subscribe for more stories where strategy, patience, and truth win in the end.